Awesome. I think we can get started. Good morning, everybody. How was everybody's first day of PSConfEU? Okay, not bad for 9 a.m. That's great. Okay, so I think today we're going to try to get the blood flowing a little bit. So I think we're going to try to just do questions kind of as they come up. So if you have any questions about anything that I'm talking about on this slide, please feel free to let me know. Let me know if on my demos you can't see anything clearly, and let me know if I'm talking too fast. That was my biggest takeaway from the keynote yesterday as well. So I'm going to do my best. Awesome. So for those of you who I haven't met before, hi, my name is Jodi Boone, and I'm the PM for machine configuration. And I'm really excited to kind of talk to you about the work that we're doing over on the Azure side of things to better improve the overall security posture, as well as the management of your servers, whether they're on-prem or really anywhere else in the cloud, GCP, AWS, VMware, etc. Huge thank you to our sponsors. It's been a great event so far for me, and I hope that you're all enjoying it as well. Oh, and here's my little slide on me. So my little icon says American, but I'm from Canada, so bonjour. I'm currently based in Seattle, pottery enthusiast. I'm a hiker and a skier, so if any of those are interesting to you, come find me. But also really looking to hear from you about if you're using DSC, Policy, Azure or Auto-Manage. So really looking forward to kind of continuing these conversations after the session today. Awesome. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about Azure Policy and some of the work that we've been doing to control not only the configurations of your resources, but also configure the operations to which you can access and control these resources. We're going to move into Azure Auto-Manage, where we're going to be talking a little bit about the way that you can declaratively represent the state of your control plane resources. So moving a little bit out of the VM data plane into the control plane, and looking at how you can actually take advantage of a lot of the cool things that Azure's been shipping over the last years. And then finally, we're going to go into a bit of a demo on how you can better harden your servers using these products together, as well as PowerShell DSC. So this is a very marketing-y slide, but the main takeaway that I kind of want to make sure that everyone's on the same page about is that Azure has a lot of really neat capabilities for you to kind of move from code to cloud and better harden your security posture, manage your end-to-end applications, and really conform to these key compliance standards to make it as easy as possible to kind of go from code to cloud. And you can take advantage of these using, a bunch of different management services. And, there's a lot on here. And so how do you know what's actually best for you to be using? How do you know which services to keep up to date with? And how do you also manage all of the prereqs to using all of these services too? So we're going to be talking about these services today within the context primarily of Arc-enabled servers, but these are also available over Arc-enabled SQL servers, Arc-enabled VMware, and Arc-enabled Kubernetes. And this really extends the power of these Azure management services from Azure Stack HCI to VMware, AWS, GCP, and even Azure IoT. So really, whenever we're talking about sort of Arc today, we're talking about anything that's not running in Azure. Awesome. So with that, we're going to talk a little bit about the way that we can control the configurations of these resources in the cloud through Azure Policy. So let's talk a little bit about what Azure Policy can do today. So the power of Azure Policy really lies in the language and expression that you can use to control the configurations of your resources. And today, we enforce this through enforcement and compliance, leveraging deploy if not exists functionality, which means that after a resource is deployed, it will inherit the configuration assigned, leveraging that remediation capability. You can use audit if not exist, which will audit the configurations of those resources, but we won't go in and make any changes. And then also deny. So this really allows you to control what you can't do to resources. And we're really looking at deny as a way to improve the overall safe operability of the way that you can manage, maintain, and govern your Azure resources that are, again, VMs or really anything else. So we're not using policy to apply configurations across one or two servers. We're really looking at this at scale. And so one of the great things about becoming Arc Connected is that you're also able to have a comprehensive inventory of all of your resources. And you can structure them in a way that aligns with your organizational structure, application structure, and really moving across kind of any boundaries that you need to through being able to apply tags, as well as organize your resources within resource groups, subscriptions, management groups, etc. And then, obviously we all want to be able to kind of automate a lot of these operations as well, which is really where this remediation as well as automation capability comes in. So you can remediate existing resources at scale through point and click processes, through the remediation capabilities, which we'll be talking a little bit more about today and how you can make that a little bit safer. You can have automatic remediation at deployment time through deploy if not exists. And then also we have a lot of really cool ways that we can integrate with Azure Event Grid, where you can trigger Azure functions or even webhooks to enact automatic remediation in the event of a compliance state change. So that's what we do today in Azure Policy, but what's new? What have we really been working on? So again, the power of Azure Policy really is in the language and expression. And so we've released a new effect called the deny delete policy, which really allows you to control what will or will not be deleted. And let's think about this in the context of a critical resource, a Cosmos database with all of your customer data. It would be really problematic if somebody who didn't understand what was actually going on here were to delete this. And sometimes it's not as simple as going in and deleting the individual database. What if somebody deletes the resource group where this database lived? So through the deny delete policy, what we're able to do is actually also incorporate a cascading behavior so that we can apply the deny action on the individual resource group and make sure that individual resources will not be deleted, even if their upper level scope no longer exists. Yes. Yeah, great question. So I think that there's a lot of simplicity in resource locks. And so if that's working for you, thanks, Alexander. So the question was sort of what differentiates the deny delete action from resource locks? And that's a question that we get a lot. And I think that the value of resource locks is really in the simplicity, but I think that this deny action can also really help sort of manage that at scale, make sure that these actions are visible to higher role level assignments and higher scopes. But if resource locks are working for you, those aren't going anywhere either. So this is just an added capability. Yeah, great question. The second thing that we're really spending a lot of time thinking about is how we can make the deployment of your Azure policies more safe and improve the overall operability and lifecycle management of managing these Azure policies. When we think about everything Azure Policy can do today, with a great power becomes great responsibility. And so we're looking at ways that we can make it safer for you to deploy these Azure policies through looking into safe deploy features, including selectors and overrides, which we've recently shipped. So selectors allow you to filter down the applicability of your policy application. And so we have a couple of neat ways where this can be applied today. And we'll be going over this in the portal as well. But right now, what you can do is filter down the applicability of your policy to a subset of regions and gradually roll this out to more regions as it becomes deployed. You can also today do this at the resource type level. So you can filter down this to a subset of applicable resource types. And we are working on this capability to include tags as a selector. Overrides also let you, outside of actually modifying that policy definition, you're able to override the effect on the policy. So let's say you have this deny delete action and you just really want to have a better idea of the effect that this is going to have on your environment. Well, you can include an override to incorporate this as an audit policy ahead of taking any deployment actions. So you'll better understand the way that this will actually come into effect in your environment. Awesome. So the other things that we've been working on here are really around performance and fundamentals. We want to make sure that Azure Policy is performant. As we know that you're not applying this to one or two resources, it really is at scale. So we've released a reduced latency on our overall compliance scans. So today, you'll see your first compliance results at an individual resource level within 5 minutes of applying your Azure Policy. And that will iteratively roll out to all resources within the scope of that policy definition within 24 hours. We also have an increased number of definitions as well as assignments at both the resource group, subscription group, and management group level. So you can now assign 200 policy assignments at any individual scope, and you can have 500 policy definitions at any scope as well. We're also really excited that we now provide compliance state changes via Azure Event Grid on the management group scope. So previously, this was only available at the subscription group and resource group levels. And now these event grid changes can be viewed at the management group scope as well. So moving all the way up to the root MG where you can apply your most high level policies. So now we're going to talk a little bit about what this means in terms of actually getting started, how to manage the state of your management services, as well as the configurations of your resources. And I kind of just want to take a step back first. So everybody in this room is not surprised to see this statement. IT management is incredibly complex. We saw the slides that we went through at State of the Shell. It's only getting more complicated. It's only getting messier. And so what we're really focusing on is reducing the amount of time it takes you to get started in using a lot of these capabilities provided by Azure. We want to improve your operational security, thinking about how we can make these deployments as safe as possible. And we want to make sure that it's easy for you to maintain your on-prem servers and your Azure servers in a way that's both declarative and scalable. And the last one here is the one that really resonates with me. It feels like we ship new things kind of on the daily sometimes, and it's actually really hard to sometimes evaluate the services that you should or shouldn't be using. And it's sometimes even harder to evaluate what's required to get started. What log analytics workspace you have to hook up, what data collection rules you need to make sure are enacted, what extensions or agents you need to have deployed. And so that's where Auto-Manage machine best practices really comes in. So the way that Auto-Manage works is you can have a collection of either built-in or custom, we call them configuration profiles. And what we'll do is deploy all of the prerequisites required to align to the Azure management services that are outlined in the cloud adoption framework. So it's as easy as possible for you to actually get a little bit more value, especially when you Arc enable a server. As soon as you have an Arc enabled server, you get all of those inventory and asset capabilities kind of right out of the box. You can start applying tags, you can organize these resources, but it can be a little bit complex to make sure that you have all of the prerequisites on these servers to get started. So Auto-Manage provides the capability to outline the services that you might want to be enrolled into, and we provide this leveraging a built-in production or a dev test workload. But let's say you don't actually want to onboard to all of the services that are outlined in the cloud adoption framework. Maybe you have a third-party anti-malware solution that you prefer to be opted into, or you have a custom backup schedule. So we have a custom configuration profile where you can pick and choose the services that you're most interested in onboarding to. And we'll go through that a little bit more in the demo as well. And the best part of this is that we will actually also make sure that we enforce these prereqs and deploy, again, any changes that are required if any of these prerequisites drift out of compliance. So we do really like to kind of think of this as DSC at the control plane level as well. So what are these services that we're talking about? These are things that range from backup, log analytics, machine configuration, Windows Admin Center, update management, Microsoft Defender for Cloud, monitoring, etc. So all of the setup that's required to kind of opt into any of these services can be handled through Auto-Manage as well. Yes, Alexander. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You also manage the control rules for naming. So how would that be resolved?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the question is, if you have any states that are already enforced through Azure Policy, and there's a conflicting declaration of what this resource should be in Auto-Manage. So the first thing that Auto-Manage does is it will scan the current state of the resources that are being applied, and in the event of conflict, in the event that you already have, a log analytics workspace connected or an automation account, we will not go ahead and change any of that. So conflict resolution in the sense that we won't deploy it if it already exists. But in the event that that does not stay the way that it should, Auto-Manage will go ahead and remediate it if in the future it sees that that is no longer configured. Good question. We're going to go back a little bit and actually head into the portal to see kind of how this works. Awesome. So what we've done now is navigated to the Auto-Manage Center. If my internet will work as well. So what we're going to do is create a custom configuration profile. So this is where you can actually again, describe the state of the management services that you want to onboard to leveraging Auto-Manage. So we'll call this one Good Morning PSConf. And then we'll go ahead and put it in a resource group. So let's say that I have a custom backup solution that I want to use. And so I'm going to deselect enabling Azure Backup. You can see that we can enroll in Microsoft anti-malware. You can also exclude specific files and locations or extensions. And you can enable real-time protection as well as a scheduled scan. You can enable machine insights monitoring. You can enable machine configuration, as well as update management, change tracking and inventory, as well as MDC, automation, log analytics workspaces, boot diagnostics, Windows Admin Center, etc. And now I'm talking too fast again. So for anybody who's used this before, there is something that's a little bit different on this page that is net new. And we're really excited that we've now released the capability to configure the Azure Windows baseline between auditing as well as apply and monitor and apply and autocorrect. So what does this mean? So today, when you provision a marketplace image of Windows Server 2019, there are about 85 rules that come back as non-compliant by default. And these are things from sort of local access rules, firewall rules, being able to deny logons locally. When we look at this in terms of the 285 rules that are described in this baseline and now actually have 100% alignment to CIS cloud controls for Windows Server 2019, this actually isn't great. And so when we leverage the Windows baseline and apply and monitor or apply and autocorrect, which for anybody who didn't attend my session yesterday, audit only will audit the state of your machines relative to those 285 settings. Apply and monitor will go ahead and deploy those settings once and monitor for any changes, but will not remediate in the event of any configuration drift. And apply and autocorrect will make sure that we deploy those settings at the time the configuration is provisioned and then continuously bring those settings into compliance within 1 hour intervals. And this is all using PowerShell DSC. And so when we look at an example of a virtual machine that has this baseline assigned in apply and autocorrect, we actually only have one rule out of the 285 that's non-compliant. And this one rule actually, we cannot automatically remediate because the security vulnerability lies in the fact that the word guest is known. So if Microsoft changes the name to Microsoft Guest, that doesn't actually improve the overall security posture. And so we can see here the kind of impact that that can have on the overall posture of your servers, especially when it's an on-prem server where you don't know how many of these rules would be non-compliant by default. And this is a marketplace image for Windows Server. So what we can do is go ahead and click Apply and Autocorrect here. we said, good morning, PSConf, and we'll go ahead and create that custom configuration profile. So now we've created this profile. How do we make sure that this can be deployed at scale, aligning with the way that you organize your resources today through Azure Policy? Well, what's really great is we actually have a built-in policy definition where you can select this custom configuration profile and roll it out at any available governance scope. Policy UX performance is actually a roadmap item, and it is on my next slide, so I'm not lying about that. But what's really great about this too is you can take advantage of a lot of those SAP operability items that we talked about earlier. So we can roll out this custom configuration profile to maybe a set of lower traffic regions to begin with, see how that behaves, and then make sure that we can roll it out to some of our heavier traffic regions once we have a little bit more confidence that this won't adversely impact anything in our environment. So we'll go ahead and click into the policy category for Auto-Manage. And so we'll click into the built-in policy, configure virtual machines to be onboarded to Azure Auto-Manage with a custom configuration profile. So when we go into assign this definition, you want to click the scope that you want to apply the entire configuration profile to. So I'll go into my subscription. We'll go into that same demo resource group. And here's where you can actually also optionally select any resources that you want to exclude from the overall policy assignment. So let's say you have a sort of a subset of resources where you have a custom DSC resource with a separate baseline that you want to make sure is applied, and you don't want any of those settings to be overridden by the settings within the Azure Windows baseline. You could also exclude those resources. So here's where we can really, again, see those resource selectors that I mentioned. So let's say we want to only apply this to, let's say, a couple of our more low traffic regions. So we can hit resource locations and we can say, you know, I only want to apply this to East US to begin with. So we can add that as a resource selector. And this policy by default is deploy if not exists. But again, you could create an override to make sure that these policies are audited before we go ahead with any deployment action. And here's where you can select that configuration profile. So now I've selected the Good Morning PSConf profile. We can go in and review and create this policy, which will then deploy all of those services that we selected in the Auto-Manage custom configuration profile at this resource group level, which can have Azure virtual machines or Arc-enabled servers in them. So really you could be applying this across like Azure, AWS, GCP, and VMware all within the same assignment, which is pretty cool. Awesome. So now we'll head back over to the slides to talk a little bit about what's kind of coming down the pipe for Azure Policy as well. Awesome. Oh, yep, we have a question. Yeah. Sorry, would you mind just repeating that? I don't know if I could hear you. Yeah, that's a great question. So today we do not, so the question was, you know, is there a process for sort of peer review or making sure that your colleagues are also aware of the policy assignments before they're deployed, if I'm understanding correctly? Yeah. So today there isn't necessarily a workflow to kind of submit this request to another role, but what we might recommend in that case is, again, to use the audit override to begin with, so you can make sure that this doesn't have kind of an adverse effect, and then evaluate the compliance results as well as the behavior, leveraging the audit functionality. But yeah, that's a great suggestion too. And you had two, right? Yeah. So the question is, can you roll back to previous policy versions? And what a well-timed question, because we are really excited. I'll start with the second box. So going back to those SDP features and making sure that we can include sort of safe operability by default through Azure Policy deployments, one of the biggest gaps has actually been version management. So we're really excited to be announcing that policy built-in definitions, as well as custom definitions, will all actually include versioning by default. And so you'll be able to specify a major, a minor, and a macro version for your built-in policy definitions, which will allow you to roll back to previous versions of those policies as well. And we're hoping to ship that this summer. So macro versions will only be for critical bugs. Minor versions will be auto upgraded in the event that they're built-ins that are published by Microsoft. And then you have total control for when you roll out major changes of either built-ins that are written and described by Microsoft or built-ins that your enterprise describes as well. But great question, and we're super excited. We know that this has been a gap in the sort of lifecycle management story for a while. So yeah, psychic. Awesome. And so the second thing in that second box there is the what if API. So we're really excited about this, again, for that kind of SDP functionality. So this will allow you to include sort of spoofed metadata. And so you can almost create a mock assignment of how this policy will behave in your environment without the actual need to assign it. So you'll be able to incorporate this in a CI/CD workflow where you want to see kind of how this policy will behave and receive a compliance result on this kind of shadow policy ahead of it actually being applied to any resources in your environment. So that could be another interesting way for you to incorporate this into kind of a review cycle, is evaluating the results of that what if API as well. So just moving one square back, again, we talked about this, and we really do feel like the power of Azure Policy really lies in the language and expression here, as well as kind of having that front door to the Azure Resource Manager as well. And so we're really going to be focusing on how we can better improve this deny capability as well. So in addition to the deny delete policy effect, we're going to be looking at a deny move policy effect, because even though a move seems a lot less detrimental than a delete, for anybody who's worked with Azure Policy before, will know that when you move a policy across tenants, you actually lose, it can be a mess. So you lose all of the policy assignments that are assigned to the resource. All of your role assignments will become erased, and you'll have a whole series of identity issues. And you really want to make sure that these resources are not moved by accident. And so we'll be announcing this capability. We'll be releasing this capability to deny a move action on resources as well. So the second thing here is a little bit different. So with capabilities, we're going to be looking at transforming that relationship of resource to effect or deployment, and focusing more on common sets of capabilities that Azure resources have today. So this will include, the resources that you want to enable private link on, or even CMK encryption. And so we're going to be looking at capabilities as a way for you to actually describe the common capabilities that you want on any applicable resource type. So you'll be able to describe that you want all applicable resources that have support for private link to use private link communications or CMK encryption, et cetera. So kind of transforming that relationship from policy to resource to capability to all resources. We also will be releasing the ability to have audit policies on ARG queries, so the Azure Resource Graph or any data plane details. We know that there is a lot of value in the data that you have in the Azure Resource Graph today. And there are capabilities and expressions that you can use in the Azure Resource Graph that you can't in policy today, including like wildcards and other expressions and being able to join across multiple data sets. So you'll be able to audit policies based on the results of ARG queries too. And then I mentioned this earlier as well, but looking into how we can make policy more performant, we know that a lot of people rely on the policy compliance page as a way to get the most up-to-date status on their configurations. And we have a lot of work to do here. So this is something that we are currently working on and will continue to work on as well. So that was the content that I had today. I know we have some more time for questions, so happy to answer anything on Azure Policy, Azure Auto-Manage, DSC, and this could be questions about the content or something that, maybe you want to see that wasn't on the last slide too. So yeah, thanks everybody. Cool. Yeah, question. So, yeah. So the question is, are we going to be including compliance, the ability to import compliance results? Compliance reporting. Compliance reporting for custom initiatives. That should actually be available today. Right. Yeah. So that should be available through an Azure Resource Graph query today. So this audit capability on ARG queries might help solve that as well. But I might have to follow up on whether or not that's something that the team is thinking about. But great question. Yes. Yeah, so the question was, are you able to achieve those kind of configurations operations through ARM, Bicep, Terraform? And the answer is yes, absolutely. Use whatever you're most comfortable with. You're able to deploy policy definitions through ARM templates. You can deploy them through the portal. You can deploy, custom guest configuration assignments through ARM and Bicep too. So it's actually a requirement for all Azure services that are deploying resources to have these capabilities across Portal, Bicep, Terraform, CLI, and PowerShell. So across the board, that should be the case. And if there isn't something, just let us know. But yeah, great question. Yeah.
There was a future to export your Azure Policy definitions into a GitHub repo, right? And that's it's now deprecated. Is there any thoughts or any plans to provide similar experience?
Yeah, so the question is, are there plans to bring back the experience to export Azure Policy definitions to a GitHub repo? And we're not really thinking about continuing to do that, but I'd love to hear from you about the way that might best work in your environment as well. Yeah. Would it still be GitHub? Maybe? Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. Yes, Alexander.
What is the Microsoft view of that? Is that feature created more in the smaller shops online that can actually do things in the GUI without thinking about making the whole deployment or like,
Yep. So the question was, who is Auto-Manage intended for? Who's using it? Is it smaller companies that might not have as many resources available to implement this automation? And the answer is yes to kind of both. We do see a lot of sort of smaller enterprises as well wanting to deploy Auto-Manage because of the simplicity, but we also see a lot of companies who are transitioning from on-prem management to Azure management, leveraging it because of how easy it is to get started using Azure management services right away. And, as you become more comfortable with Azure as well, you can choose to move to Azure Policy for some of those more complex operations. We do also see this resonating with companies working in highly regulated industries as well because of the focus on server security posture and alignment to CIS as well. Great question.
What's actually happened on a machine that will be part of the auto-manage kind of implementing all those things? Who is responsible for doing what and how that happens on the actual Arc-enabled server, for example?
Yeah, so the question was, how is this actually happening on an Arc-enabled server? And are you asking more in terms of the end user or our platform? Yeah. Yeah, so it can be an admin that has the contributor access to the sort of set of resources. And we recommend that this is usually done at the subscription level. So usually subscription owners. And what's really going on under the hood is that we're actually running what if templates hourly to detect if all of these services are still conformant to their set of prerequisites. And then if that's not the case, then a deployment action will be taken. But there are still events when we're not actually able to sometimes make that change. It could be a permissions issue or it could be some other environmental error, especially in the case of on-prem servers where we don't always have all of the visibility that we need. So in that case, there are certain instances where that admin will have to go into the portal or leverage PowerShell in order to take a manual remediation action. So we do recommend that this is usually done by sort of a cloud solutions architect or someone who's familiar with both the portal as well as PowerShell. Yeah. Yeah, so in the portal, in the event that something is not working, you'll see an action required, and you'll be able to see these events as well on Event Grid. So you'll have sort of that notification pipeline in a somewhat similar way to Azure Policy, where you'll see kind of a high-level description of the conformance of your resource, and then through Event Grid, you'll have the details to be able to better debug what's going on. Yeah, great question. Yeah, great question. So the question was, do you need the guest configuration extension for Auto-Manage to work? And the answer is yes, but you don't need to do it. So what Auto-Manage does is it deploys the extensions that are required to use the services. So the like dependency agent, for example, the guest config extension, those are all configured as a part of the initial deployment. And those are some of the checks that are made on that regular basis. So if somebody deletes that extension for any reason, but you're relying on that server security baseline and you start to see sort of that non-compliant result, Auto-Manage will within the hour reinstall the extension as well. So the question is there a connection between Defender and Auto-Manage? And the answer is yes. So for Azure VMs, we do enroll you by default to the free tier of Microsoft Defender. And that server security baseline actually aligns with the recommendation to remediate secure configurations in Defender for Cloud. So that also does feed into your secure score. So the question is, if there are additional configurations in Defender that you want to make sure are remediated, will Defender will Auto-Manage pick those up and remediate them? And the answer is not right now. So it is limited to the server security baseline as well as the services that are outlined there. But beyond that, that action needs to be taken in Defender. Yeah, but great question. Yes. Yeah, that's a great question. So can you import other baselines like Tanium CIS or German PSI? And the answer is not right now, but we are really doing some work to see how we can help you better customize the rules that are in your Azure security baseline. And so I'd love to, talk to you about what the best way would be to make that work for you. Is it being able to customize the individual rules within the Azure policy? Do you want to add more rules? Are there DSC resources that we can, partner with the community to help get out there? So yeah, if anybody has any thoughts on that, we'd love to hear. So yeah, but great question. Thanks. Awesome. Thanks everybody. I think we can go grab our second cup of coffee. Cool. Thank you.